Hello X. I was seriously considering posting this over at Paul instead, because of what I underwent and the implications of it. But I think Paul has way too many eyes on it for my liking, and I also feel like Paul would very likely derail the thread with nonsense, so here I am instead. To be frank, I am an employee of sorts for the elites of the world. I cannot disclose who specifically, or what families, but I am sure you already have a picture inside your head of the types of people that I work for. I have worked for them for a few years now, and I guess you could describe my job title as being a security man of sorts, but it's really not as simple as that. I'm not the top guy. I work under someone, but we make absolutely anything and everything happen for these people. We plan out how events will go, what places we can rent for them to take place, the best security measures, what routes they should take, who is invited, and etc. I could go on and on about all of the tasks and duties I have performed in the past in order for one of their events to run smoothly and without a hitch. Now, these events that I've mentioned, I'm not talking about children's birthday parties or planning weddings or anything of the sort. Sure, we have taken care of things like that in the past, but those types of events are usually the lowest on the totem pole and really don't take that much coordination from us. These events are not why we are on a permanent payroll and made to sign countless NDAs and other such things. I am talking about the ultimate underbelly of the elites that the public cannot know about whatsoever, lest they be exposed for what they are. I'm talking illegal shit. Seriously illegal shit. Shit that I am ashamed for ever being a part of, and I fear I am destined for hell because of my taking part. Things that you cannot even imagine, that I would not utter even to my soulmate if I had one. At this point, I don't care, and my conscience needs to be clear. You can't hate me more than I hate myself, so I say go ahead and do your absolute worst to me. I can take it. I will be upfront with you now. I have planned kidnappings, assassinations, small scale, small fry, and for some of the pettiest reasons possible. I have worked with drug dealers, human traffickers, staged robberies, and made things look like someone has taken their own life. You name it, and I have fucking done it. Let me tell you about one night, a few weeks ago. I was assigned to an auction that was taking place in a completely rented out historical building in New York City. We had the whole thing planned out, and decided that this was the best place. Money was obviously no object to us, and no questions were asked when we showed up with the money and made the request. I can't say exactly which building this took place in, but let's just say it's slated for demolition within the next year and will hopefully wash away every trace of what happened. We turned up out of the blue with badges, documents, and money. It was a same-day rental type of deal, and we had to make everyone sign an NDA before we kicked them out. We already worked it out with our bosses, and owners of course, but we had to do the legwork. As weird as it sounds, this initially seemed to be more mundane than our usual ventures, and I was mentally preparing for a long night ahead. Usually, we stay away from anything that people without ultra wealth can rent out, or that is accessible to the public often, but I guess this was a special occasion. Plus the aforementioned upcoming foreclosure definitely sweetened the pot. So, like I said, it's more of an on-the-day type of deal, and me and a guy I worked with pretty regularly were there a good few hours before everything would go down, to make sure everything was kosher. I'm talking scout the place out, scout the local streets, secure everything, and just generally make sure that everything would go down without a hitch. This was easy enough, and something we had done 1,000 times by now, but God was it boring. The big concern is usually law enforcement prowling around, and then there's also the chancers, usually stupid homeless people, who decide they're gonna try to make a run for it, or try and sneak into the place through another entrance. Easiest way to prevent this is to rough them up, and beat it into their thick skulls before the idea even comes into their heads. We lay it out nice and simple, that if they try anything, we are authorized to kill them. We obviously wouldn't actually do this, unless it was an emergency because, again, we don't want pigs sniffing around on any crucial events like this. But these guys are all drug-addled and can't figure that out. After everything looks good and the place is secure, and we have the people in place, so we know about any incoming patrols, the boss tells us to basically sit tight for the next 3 or 4 hours. What a drag. This is always the worst part. Anyway, before he hangs up, my boss gives me one more order, direct from the client. This happens all the time. They really like to be specific and have everything go their way. He tells me to especially be on the lookout for people changing. Gotcha, boss. No worries. Figure he's been tipped off about prior behavior at these events. I'm talking people getting thrown out and changing clothes and outfits to try and come back, or even the crazies who will use semi-permanent dye in the bathroom just to not get noticed. I'm being serious. We've had people try to waltz back in with these expensive as fuck hyper-realistic masks that look like Leatherface has sliced it right off someone's face. You wouldn't believe the crazy lengths that people will go to get into these things. As for why they've been thrown out, that is a different story and not part of my job description. They tell me, and I do it. I can't imagine the kind of sadistic shit you'd have to do to have even these freaks not want you around them. Anyway, so the waiting game began, and me and the guy I was working with were left to sit like lemons. This happens nearly every time, so I should be used to it, but no amount of exposure prepares you for being bored senseless for multiple hours at a time. We're not really seen as important in the grand scheme of things. To our clients anyways, the elites. They consider us lesser, so they don't care that we have to wait. We get paid the big bucks to suck it up. After about 3 hours of waiting had passed, and we were at our wits' end, a man appeared from inside the building and called me in to have a word with me. My partner was told to stay outside, and so his curse of boredom would not be lifted just yet. He led me inside and checked out all my credentials and everything, as is standard procedure. Can never be too careful with this kind of thing. After checking that everything was in order, he led me through the building wordlessly. Makes things easier for me. Nothing I hate more than mindless chatter, but if I'm being honest, it wouldn't be the worst thing after the boredom I had to endure. It's a building I've been in many times, and it's a building I thought I knew very well, but I guess not. We scout the places and give recommendations, but it's ultimately up to the client to pick the place and approve, and sometimes they have special requests for venues. This was one such case, and after all is said and done, I can see why. So the guy was leading me, and in no time at all, I was somewhere I had never been before. Like, seriously. It's like new rooms and layouts were put into the place overnight, or I wandered into an alternate reality or something like that. I didn't bring it up to the guy though. I have to be professional at all times, unless I want to be fired and stop getting boatloads of cash. I couldn't really say where the room was, even if you gave me the map of the place. It was like, it didn't fit into the schematics. It was a pretty unremarkable place by all accounts though, and it was one that we passed through quite quickly. The guy continued to lead me along, and we came to an incredibly narrow staircase that looked like it might be a tight fit, even for the leanest of guys. Weird decorations on the walls as we passed by too. Weird robes that looked oddly spiritual, like something a Catholic priest would wear, but not quite right. Anyway, we squeezed through and made our way down a few flights of stairs. After reaching the bottom, we came out to a corridor that looked to be encased in concrete. Looked like the place was soundproof or something, which wouldn't surprise me at all. The corridor went on for a ways at both ends, and seemed mostly barren, aside from an elevator in the middle of it, and some security cameras scattered about the place. What the fuck? This guy could have saved me a walk. I was considering making a joke about it, but I thought it was best not to. He did catch me glancing at the elevator a few times, and looked back at me and just shook his head. "It doesn't go up," he said. Huh? He just turned back away from me and called the elevator to our floor. He motioned for me to step in first, and he followed closely behind. Indeed, there was no option to go up to where we came from. There were only two options in this elevator: the floor we were currently on and the sub-basement. I had no idea this place had so many floors underneath it. He pushed the button, and I had to stand behind him in an uncomfortable silence. Even though the silence made the trip seem like it lasted forever, the elevator ride actually did take a long-ass time. I'm talking maybe like 2 minutes straight of us descending in the thing. That's a lot of fucking floors. The elevator opened up onto a brand new corridor. It wasn't like the thin, endlessly stretching corridors that sat above us. The corridors were much wider and more welcoming. There was actual real lighting down here, and not some dim flickering bulbs. It looked like we were outside almost, with the amount of light streaming in, which I knew was impossible, considering how far under the ground that we were. I could hear tons of chatter already. Guess I was slightly late to the party. There were tons of doors all lined up that led into the main hall. From the chatter, I could tell that some of the clients' guests had arrived already. They must have had their own entrance that they used. Again, whatever. That part is none of my business. All I gotta do is ensure it runs smoothly, and if they want to take extra precautions or whatever, then they can. Again, the guy who led me here had no words for me, and simply motioned over to where he wanted me to go, and then left me to fend for myself. No, seriously, he fucked right back off upstairs, so I guess he had other more important matters to attend to than me. Kind of rude, considering he wasn't part of the elite club either, and was some kind of hired hand, but I guess even the hands hired directly by the elites, and not through a company, sees us as lesser. Whatever, I had a job to do. The room I was pointed to was nothing special, and just had blank, cream walls that were completely smooth, along with a bare, white ceiling. Nobody could afford a fancy chandelier. Peering into the room, the elite guests were immediately obvious to me. I've worked in this role long enough to be able to pick them out of a lineup. It's not so much even the clothes they wear, or how they talk or smell. You can just kind of sense what kind of people they are. They give off kind of an aura that you can sense with enough practice. Believe me, it's not a nice one either. At first, I wasn't sure if I'd be sitting in for their special event, or if I was being placed on a door directly outside, but I spotted someone right by the first door who looked to be security, just like me. Not hired by our company, but the same attire. Depending on the job, we sometimes get more info, depending on what it is. If I was working something more active like a kidnapping or something with more moving parts, I'd have a lot more intel to work with. This time not so much. There wasn't much that I needed to know to do my job this time, but my boss did mention that they would be holding an auction of some kind in this building. By his tone, I knew they wouldn't be bidding on furniture. As dark as it sounds, it was something I had grown used to. Bidding on human slaves was just a drop in the fucking bucket. I walked up to the guy and gave a nod, and he nodded back. He was wearing a mask, like kind of a masquerade ball mask, but not exactly the same. It was different, like it was crafted specifically for his face. Instead of just covering part of the face, it was a full face mask, except it had clear cutouts for the eyes and the mouth that I could see through the holes. It also had some kind of marking on it, like some kind of pattern below both eyes. Everyone in the room was wearing one, not just him. He reaches below the table into a bag and says, "Here, you'll need this tonight." He's holding out a mask in his hand, and it's nearly identical to his, but I tell him I'm good, and that I don't mind showing my face for the event. He says no, you don't understand. No is not an option. It's a request by the client. You can put it on now, or I can escort you out of the door and have a word with your boss. Yeesh, dude, okay, I get it. Didn't need to jump straight to the frets. While the abusive language was not out of the ordinary, having to wear a full face mask for a job was certainly a first, not including a balaclava or something I'd wear if we were breaking into somewhere. The guy wasn't exactly intimidating in his stature, but fucking around in this business will have you finding out real fast. Best behavior at all times is key to keeping both your job and your head. I asked what the deal would be with exact positions and duties for tonight, and he laid it out in as few words as possible. The client wanted us inside the room, not on the door outside. They needed us there as a precaution. Said that things could break loose or need to be put back into order, and that's what we'd be there for. Oh fuck. After handing me my mask and telling me this, the contractor guy didn't have any more words for me, and we watched as the guests trickled in over the next few hours. The room was becoming packed out pretty quickly. More and more intricately crafted masks were appearing. Faces of different animals, grotesque humanoid shapes, even some alien-looking ones. After the room seemed to be at its limits, and the night was drawing on, one last gentleman appeared at the door, who called both me and the contractor over to him. Again, no words wasted, just a motion with his fingers. He told us he was the host for the evening. I asked about the masks, and he told us it was an insurance policy of sorts. It's a way to let people loose, while still keeping some semblance of power. Unmasked, with all those prying eyes, some might find it a little, uncomfortable. We know who they all are already. The masks are for their sake, for their enjoyment. You'll see soon enough. And with that, the show was about to begin. It was not the show I was expecting. He brought the show to a beginning, and had all sorts of staff wheeling in tables and chairs, and they set up something of a dining hall. I thought the shit was an auction. He told me that it was. Auction, and then a dinner after all is said and done, after their hungry work is all finished. Cool. Maybe I won't have to cook tonight if they're generous or have enough leftovers. The host smiled and called everyone away from where the dining table was set up, and he opened a door that led into a room directly connected to the dining one that was separated only by one big wall. The ceiling of the place was massive. The host drew back a big red curtain like you'd see in a theater play and kept his big grin. What the fuck? I mean, I expected it when they told me it was an auction, but still, what the fuck? A row of people in cages. Some women, some men, even a cage with multiple children stuffed in. This really was going to be a long night. Some of the people were fucked up. Not to be mean, but some of them were freaks. Children, with heads way too big for their bodies. A man with a deformed face that almost looked like it was sunken in. A woman with legs that looked so thin and long that they might break if she put any pressure on them at all. Just a row of people like this. Some people didn't seem to have any disability or deformity, but I'm not fully sure. I felt all of their eyes on me, piercing me, judging me, asking me what the fuck was going on and why they were there. No fucking wonder they gave us masks. I would have felt even more exposed than I already was. Hard to believe that they'd think any of these people could escape their cage or bindings though. The host started his little performance, but I'll admit that I tuned out of most of it. I couldn't focus at all, and I knew I needed to just sit tight and get through it. Just another job. Another fucking job. The show went on, and the host talked about all of the people and called them specimens or creatures and acted like he was a businessman, trying his hardest to get a sale on a new car and listing all of the features of each person. It went on, and bidding wars ensued until every last person on show was bought up. Fuck dude, I hate reliving the shit. Of all of the horrible shit I've done in this job, this is what I regret the most. If I could go back, I would have not worked that night, and maybe I could have still slept somewhat soundly. The prices some people paid were insane. Sums of money I didn't have the brain power to even imagine. Amounts of money that I would never see in a million lifetimes. After the end of it all, the host thanked everyone for turning up and making it such a successful event. He greeted everyone by name and thanked each person individually and assured them they'd made a great purchase. Then the conversations turned to dinner and each person's dietary requirements, how they wanted the food prepared, how big of a portion, how rare they wanted the meat, and if they wanted to eat it all now or save some for back home. How much fucking food do these fat fucks eat? The host ushered everyone back into the dining hall and told everyone to sit down and get ready to eat. After the last person had filtered through, the host ordered us to come and help move the cages. I felt nasty. They would try and touch me through the bars. Some would beg me to let them go. Some didn't even bother putting up a fight and just stayed silent. After we'd helped move the cages and people, the host told us to go and wait with the guests. We went through the door, and I heard screaming. I didn't want to fucking know. After a fairly long time, the host returned with a cart, and a few of her people had them too. They wheeled them in and started laying out the food. All of the guests started tucking in almost instantly. They all had their own platters, with a name card on each so that the food would not be mixed up. One of the elites got up from the table and motioned towards me and the contractor. He spoke briefly. He said he had extra food, and he wanted us to enjoy some too. I was about to say no thank you, but the contractor jabbed me in my side and just stared at me with his eyes as wide as they could go when I looked back in his direction. Guess I had no choice. It was pretty nice, honestly. I only wanted to refuse because I still had the image of those fucked up people in cages still in my head. In truth, I was starving. It tasted kind of like beef, except nowhere near as rough. It was easy to bite into and chew, and had a tinge of sweetness to it. I asked him what kind of meat it was, and he just told me it was the most expensive money could buy. Lamau, yeah, no shit, bro. We already know you have bucket loads of cash. The host stormed in, pretty uncharacteristically, and looked a little flustered. He stomped straight over to me and the contractor and practically pulled us out of the place. Once we got into the next room, he immediately told us we had a new directive. One of the little shits has gotten loose. Some idiot hired for the kitchen wasn't paying attention and was teasing one of them, and he hit him and slipped away when he turned his back. Find him, and the client will be sure to give you a bonus. You ain't gotta ask me twice. This is the whole reason we are here. It didn't take long to corner the poor kid. He had no idea of the layout of the place, and we knew there weren't many places he could go or hide. No way for him to get that lift working by himself either. He started sobbing as soon as we found him, but he didn't beg. I felt sorry for the poor bastard, because he was only a kid, but I tried to make myself feel better in my own head by saying he could endure worse things than slavery. Worst case, he'll have to clean rooms and laundry and shit. Yeah, I shut that train of thought down real fucking quick. The key in this job is to do first and think never. We hauled him back to the host and sat him down. The host placed a bag on his head and put him onto his knees. Then he told us to beat him. I'm cutting out the details for this part because I am not proud, but I did what I had to do. After we were done, 2 of our hired hands came out, and the host told them to take him back to the kitchen. I didn't let it slip, but it clicked for me then. I'm not naive. I'm not fucking stupid. I realized what was going on, and I had to use all I had in me to stop myself from vomiting or having a panic attack when the realization hit me. I knew what they were doing, and I knew what they made me fucking eat, and typing it out now makes me want to kill myself. The rest of the night went pretty smoothly after that, depending on your definition of smooth in a situation like that. I think the host knew that I knew, but it wasn't the first time I'd done or seen something fucked up. There were no threats. There didn't need to be. Just silence and a few looks here and there. We did get a big bonus in the end, and my boss got a very warm review about our services. My friend out front got a lucky break in the end. I didn't even have the mental strength to tell him what I saw at the end of the night. The guests left pretty quickly once the meal had ended, and they all left out of the same hidden entrance that they came in through. The host was even kind enough to offer me a ride home. Fuck it, why not? Not much else to lose. So, yaks, that was probably the story of the most fucked up job I've ever undertaken. I have more stories, a lot more stories. I could definitely tell you more, as long as I keep the personal details of people and places to a minimum. I have one where we were basically hired to kidnap the abusive boyfriend of one of the client's daughters and make his life hell. That's one I don't regret. Piece of shit got what he deserved. Okay, so this happened last summer, but here goes. For the 4th of July, some friends and I decided to drive up to West Virginia. One of our pals has a cabin out there, so we packed some bags and planned on spending 3 nights in the forest. It wasn't much, but it was dry and had a flushing toilet, and there was some crazy lady down the mountainside who always had moonshine. We were sold. Billy, Brett, and I drove out there together. Joe and Katie were already there. It was Joe's cabin, and they'd been there a day or two. When we got there, Katie warned us not to leave our shit outside overnight. We could run around naked for all she cared. Wouldn't have been the first time. But anything related to food had to be burned completely or taken inside overnight. She said something had torn apart their trash, probably a black bear, which wasn't much of a surprise since they'd been spotted all over the area. Back up a bit. Halfway to the mountains, driving from DC, Billy realized he forgot the directions. Naturally, we did what anyone would and called his wife to read off the directions. She gave him shit, of course, as a typical nagging wife does, and the rest of us pretty much ragged on him for the rest of the day. I could tell he was getting pretty tired of our shit, but he took it like a champ. Billy just sat there and smiled as we drove, his head down, reading off the directions he wrote down. Due to Billy's dumbass, we got there about 2 hours late. It was now around 6 p.m., well after our first round of jello shots were due, and we were all pretty hot and tired of being twisted up in that car with a metric ton of bullshit, half of which was Billy's essential camping gear. We got unloaded, and I sat my ass down in a chair. I don't remember exactly what I said. We all said a lot of things, but I gave Billy some kind of shit about the campfire that he was trying to light, and he got pissed. It's kind of hard to tell when sunset is in the forest, in the mountains, since you can't really see the sun, but it was starting to look like dusk. Billy set off a one-man hike to cool his shit. Meanwhile, Joe and Katie fired up a grill and started cooking, while Brett and I passed out a few beers and strung up a hammock. In that order, it was interesting. After a while, I realized it was getting pretty dark, and Billy was still nowhere to be found. He set off with no flashlight, in a forest he'd never been to, alone, and even after several drinks, I was wondering how much longer we should wait before trying to find him. The 4 of us were just discussing this when Billy showed up. I asked him where the hell he had been, and he said he'd just walked up the mountain a ways, then back down when he got tired. Whatever. It didn't make much sense, but then again, where would you go in a forest, besides to another part of the forest? We sat around the campfire for a while. Billy got there just in time because the chicken was just coming off the barbecue. We tossed around some jokes and bullshit, told a story or two, and had another round of drinks. I realized after a few minutes that Billy was not joining in. Since he got back, about 20 minutes, he'd just been standing there, staring at the campfire with this blank look on his face. It was a little unsettling, actually. I can't really put my finger on it, but that's not what freaked me out the most. I looked Billy up and down, and he didn't look quite right. After a few drinks, I guess I hadn't paid much attention at first, but if you weren't looking at his face, you'd swear it was someone else. His shoulders were a bit too thin. Billy spent some time in the Marines and took that shit seriously. His legs were too short. It almost looked like his shorts were sagging, but they weren't. He just didn't have the right proportions. He turned all of a sudden, kind of jerked his head around, and looked at me, and caught my stare. I didn't really know what to say. I just pretended to get distracted by something and looked away. Without much warning, Billy turned and started walking away pretty briskly. Brett asked him where the fuck he was going. It was his turn to share a story or whatever. Billy said something about having to pass and didn't even slow down. He walked out behind the cabin, which was strange because he'd normally just whip it out on the nearest tree. I was pretty buzzed, so after a couple of minutes, I figured maybe that was it. Maybe I'd had a little too much of that backwoods brew, and maybe he's still pissed at us. Who knew? But then Billy came back to the campfire. He was completely out of breath. Katie caught onto it at first. We just watched him walk around the cabin, which was uphill from us, He came back from the opposite way, almost like he circled the whole property and hiked back from the bottom of the road. Billy immediately started asking if the food was done, said he was starving, and started telling us about this tree stand he found that some hunter must have abandoned out in the forest. Joe asked him how he was hungry after downing 3 pounds of chicken 10 minutes ago, but he had no idea what Joe was talking about. I was getting pretty uneasy at this point. I had no idea what the hell was going on, but I knew that something was not right. I knew for a fact, even now, that whoever I saw standing by the campfire was not Billy. His clothes were right, I guess, but he didn't really look or sound the same. I tried talking to Brett about it, but he was pretty wasted and was having trouble finding his own pockets by then. It was useless. I don't remember going to bed, but I remember waking up. I crashed in the hammock and was the last one awake. I walked into the cabin, and everyone else was already eating breakfast. Brett and Joe were pretty fucking hungover and didn't say much at all. Halfway through our meal, Kitty asked me, kind of asleep, where I put that awesome shirt I'd been wearing. I had no clue what she was talking about. Maybe she had more to drink than I thought, but then Joe asked me too. Apparently, sometime during the night, I'd walked into the cabin. I do not recall this. I was kind of scooting along, like my leg was asleep, which got everyone's attention, except for Billy, who was out cold, and I guess I was wearing some kind of orange camo jacket. At this point, I just knew they were fucking with me. I don't even own something like that. I said maybe it was Brett, coming back from taking a piss, but no, they said it was definitely me. They said I walked in, opened the cooler, and downed an entire pack of hot dogs before walking back out the door. I fucking hate hot dogs. What the hell?